Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. We talk a lot about oil prices on this podcast, but we've never really talked to an oil producer about how the industry actually works. Brookside Energy is an ASX-listed oil and gas producer, but its operations are very much focused in the US. David Prentice is the Managing Director of Brookside Energy and the perfect person to give us a 101 on the industry. David, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Nice to be with you.
Now, I want to get into Brookside, but can we just take a step back? We talk about oil and gas together, right? Obviously very different commodities though, energy commodities, but different things. Why is it that we talk about oil and gas?
So I guess, specific to Brookside and specific to the onshore US patch that we operate in, typically the oil and gas comes out of the formation together. So explaining it in very, very simple terms, if you've got liquid with the gas suspended in the liquid and you start to bring that to surface, the gas bubbles expand and help to bring the liquid to the surface. And so there's a nice symbiotic relationship there between the two. And then, what we do and what most onshore US oil and gas producers do is separate the gas from the liquids on the location. The oil gets trucked to a refinery that's usually very, very nearby, and the raw gas goes into a pipeline, and usually the natural gas liquids, which are a high value product in that stream, gets stripped out at that point, and the gas goes in the US into the national grid to be used, and the liquids get sold. So that's a very high level description of.
That's perfect. So an operation like Brookside, the costs are in. I mean, there seems to be lots of costs there, but is it mostly in finding the oil and gas? Is it in extracting it? Is it in distribution? Like, how do the economics of an oil company work?
Yeah, so if you look at it, the most costly part really is in what I call the engineering part of the business. So the drilling the wells to extract the oil and gas is the most capital intensive part of the business. The prospecting side of the business, which I think is, arguably the most rewarding, particularly for the small, E&P companies. You can do that on a relatively modest budget. That's really about, good science, good people, good ideas, and testing all of those things. But once you get into production, drilling these wells, they're typically, $8 to $10 million each to drill. So, you're starting to spend big licks of capital. But once the wells are down, if you're in the right play, which we are, in a good area where the rocks are, where the reservoir quality is high, and you're not producing any impurities, you've got a good high value stream, then the operating costs are actually very low. So once the well's down and producing, the operating costs are very low. So, in our case, we're talking, significantly less than $10 per barrel of oil equivalent. It would be our ongoing sustaining kind of operating costs. So there's a lot of margin there once you get there.
Yeah, okay. So Brookside Energy, where are you? Where are you operating? What mine or mines do you have?
Yeah, so we are located in a place called the Anadarko Basin, which is in Oklahoma. We're about 2 hours drive south of Oklahoma City, quite close to the Oklahoma-Texas state line. And this is an area that's had, 100 years of oil and gas exploration. It's a very geologically well understood area, and really what companies like us and some of the other bigger players that are active in the area are really doing is sifting through 100 years of old data to look for areas that have been underexploited. So where we can go in with new technology and really sort of recover oil and gas that previously wouldn't have been recovered by the old timers.
Stay with me, David. We'll be back in a minute. I'm speaking to David Prentice, Managing Director of Brookside Energy. The oil and gas, we talk about Shell, ExxonMobil, Total, some of these massive companies. We talk about the energy, the big guys here, Woodside, Santos. How do juniors like yourselves compete in that? Is it about what you just described, going through data and finding oil and gas that may have been left behind? I'm just interested in why there are so many companies.
Yeah, look, I think it's a similar story to what you would see in the West Australian hard rock business. I guess, the typical role of the small junior companies has been really to do the work around, that prospecting and proving up side of things. And that's typically smaller, more nimble companies are better at doing that than the bigger companies. So the flip side of that, of course, is that once you do make a large discovery and you're going into more of the kind of the manufacturing part of the business, then obviously these big companies bring to the table some capital efficiencies around, their cost of capital, their access to equipment, their buying power, all those things. So there's a place for everybody in the market, and there's often crossover between the two. But generally speaking, it's a lot easier for a small company to have an idea, quietly go about, acquiring the rights to the land that you need to test that idea without sort of inflating asset prices too quickly. You can imagine if you're a farmer in Oklahoma and, a truck pulls up in your driveway and it's got Exxon written on the door, you're going to think that you've won lotto and prices jump up very quickly. Whereas, a little white truck turns up with Brookside on the door, then people are like, okay, well, these guys are having a go and let's have a conversation. So I think that's the general description of how that all works.
Okay. So in terms of the challenges, and I'm coming towards ESG, environmental challenges, just park how long oil and gas is going to be around for. That's a debate for others to have. That's fine. But just in terms of getting the oil out and the oil and gas out, separating it, shifting it, all that, how much better is the industry at that than it was in environmental terms?
So look, enormously better is the answer to that. And, it's frustrating for me sometimes when I talk about this subject, because I don't think the industry does a particularly good job at explaining how we go about our business and the safeguards that we put in place. And it's really useful to tell a story about the way we operate in Oklahoma, and this is the same for people operating in Texas or Colorado, wherever you might operate. Typically, you are operating on privately owned land where the farmer owns the rights to the oil and gas. In other words, they're the beneficiaries of the royalties that come from the production of oil and gas. And you don't get to go and explore on his land without negotiating with him, a lease to do that. And the terms of that lease are negotiated typically, what I call the kitchen table leasing. So, you're sitting down at their kitchen table and you're discussing how you might go about exploring, how you might go about drilling, what kind of safeguards you're going to put in place. And ultimately, these people live there. And they've probably got sons and daughters or relatives that work in the oil and gas industry. They understand the industry very well. And so if you have a poor reputation for your environmental social and governance sort of, if you've got a poor reputation in that area, everybody knows. And so you just simply don't get a lease because they won't let you in their front gate. So it's kind of hardwired into the system to say, well, you need to protect the environment. You need to have safe operating conditions for your workers. You need to do all of these, and you need to look after your local community because you're going to be working with those people. Chances are you know some of them, right? So it's sort of hardwired into the industry that we have to really protect the environment, protect our people, and behave responsibly in producing what is a very important energy source for the local community.
What about oil prices? So a couple of years ago, they were negative, whatever that means. I suppose you're paying someone to store oil because there's so much of it.
That's correct, yeah.
Right? Yep. And then you get to, $100 plus, $100 plus a barrel. Yep. They're relatively high on a historical standard now that they have come off from where they were. How does a company manage kind of the ups and downs of oil prices, particularly, say, someone like Brookside Energy? You're doing your thing, yet you don't know whether in a year's time you're going to get $30 or $100.
No, so that's a great question. So, I think where the industry lost its way in what I would call the 2010s was, people, felt like growth for growth's sake was the right way to go, and the market was rewarding companies for growth's sake, and people lost sight of the economics. If you go back to the 80s and the 90s when prices were more volatile perhaps and there was a lot more privately run companies where the investment capital was a lot closer to the managers of those capital. In other words, the people who were putting the capital in were a lot closer to the managers of the capital. Then I think people were really focused on returns. What if I give you $1 what am I going to get back? And I think we lost sight of that in the 2010s, but we've firmly got a grasp on it now. And one of the things that we did, when we were doing our prospecting back in 2018, we first started taking our leases in this area in the Anadarko Basin. We said, look, we want to look for rock that's going to deliver, a 10% rate of return when the oil price is $40 and the gas price is $2.50.
Yep.
And if we can do that, if we can find that kind of rock, then to some degree we will be immune from some of that volatility. And so that's the way to manage that. And that's not really rocket science. It's just something that the industry kind of lost focus on, I guess. And we're firmly back in that camp now, where people are looking for a return on their investment, and in order to do that, you need to have an eye on those metrics.
We are totally out of time, but I'm loving this because I'm learning a lot. David, are you a geologist by any chance, by trade or not?
No, I'm a finance person by trade, but I've been working long enough in the oil patch to have a reasonable grasp on the engineering and geology. Yes.
No, I remember the Rio, Tom Albanese, I think he was, the Rio Tinto boss many years ago, and I happened to be at a media lunch with him, and he had this term, the natural optimism of a geologist. And it's always stuck with me because I think that's exactly what you need sometimes. David, thank you very much for talking to Fear and Greed.
No, it was a pleasure, and thanks for the time.
That was David Prentice, Managing Director of Brookside Energy. This is the Fear and Greed Business Interview. We're not an investing podcast. In fact, if you're thinking about investing, we always recommend you go and get professional advice. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's best business podcast. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.